welcome to this episode of Reel It In. I'm Dan Sapin, and I'm here with my buddies
Martin Hallberg, currently repping the high coast of northern Sweden.
Cool.
Joe Messina, still repping Boston.
We're repping?
I guess
so.
How long have I been repping, and why didn't anybody tell me?
Tonight we're repping it.
Am I qualified?
You're the repper.
Known to rep.
I'm the repper?
Dan the
All
repper.
right. I'll take it. We are here today to talk about dreaming and why it's such a big deal for us. And what I'm going to do, since I've tried to talk about this idea a number of times, but it always comes up a little more awkwardly than this text I wrote to my buddy the other day. So I'm going to read it to you. I've been filled with thoughts about how the human psyche, as seen from one outside perspective, is obsessed with its dreaming and its dreams. Dreams per se, the life of imagining, even the fact that there is this peculiar constant creation and commentary of alternate realities, these multimodal representations. We're dreaming them involuntarily. We dream them at night. We're haunted by those dreams. We interpret those dreams. We tell variations on reality as if they're objective accounts, partly because our memory constantly jams and improvises on every bit of material that comes through our minds, and partly because we never remember things precisely as they happened. We're always overwriting and rewriting our memories based on the last time we remembered them and whatever happened since then. We write those realities so as to induce dreams, or as some of our favorite psychoanalytic thinkers, Mike Eigen, Wilfred Bion in particular, call them hallucinations. We write those realities so as to induce dream hallucinations in others. We configure the language specially so as to inspire idea, sense, metaphor, hallucinations of conditions, situations we may have never experienced, or which point to a way beyond our own capacity for experience. We go places to have and experience alongside other people those hallucinations. We go back to revisit the ones we enjoyed or which fascinated us in some way, movies, shows, reruns of Welcome Back, Kotter, whatever it happens to be. We create music to induce the shifting play of emotions and the sensual responses that grabbed us for the sheer love of the patterns, the feeling of it, for the synchronization of aspects of ourselves with the patterns that we get from other people. Think of a soundtrack to a movie. Think of the music itself and why we go to a certain song at a certain time, why one of those songs can't get out of our heads. It's not just music. That piece of music is the whole map, the whole contour of the emotions and the thoughts we had. So that's a dream also. It's a musical dream. And so on. I mean, we're all about the dreams. We have powerful philosophies concerned with the character of experience. And these peculiar things we call beautiful, or beauty itself, which we also associate with strength, simplicity, complexity, touch, the feeling, the sensual quality of things. Even our science and our math are formulated and judged in many respects by the stories they tell, the formal patterns that define them. And whether they're elegant, that's the other thing that came to mind, that scientists like to talk about equations and theories in terms of whether they're beautiful, whether they're elegant, whether they describe and predict the contour of experience or the contour of life, the phenomenon they're trying to describe, or a world beyond experience, but we're trying to find words to give a feeling for this thing which isn't captured in words. Philosophers like Alfred North Whitehead, who had said that every idea has its feeling, almost a flavor, You know, when an idea excites you, it doesn't just bring up a feeling in you, it has almost a taste or a scent to it that you want to come back to. Um, we are the dreamers. I had this idea that if some alien anthropologists, they wouldn't be called anthropologists because they don't know about us yet, but they've been coming to study us and they report back to the Institute for, who the hell are those guys on that other planet? And they're asked, well, what's up with this species? What's their thing? And the alien anthropologist says, I don't know, these people are obsessed with their dreams. And maybe he has to explain what a dream is, this weird way we have of thinking when we're asleep. Or maybe it's understood that sentient creatures dream. But what he reports is these people don't stop. They dream at night, and they wake up and they think about their dreams. They get really anxious because their dreams fade away and they can't hold on to them. But then they try to remember them, and then they tell them. And then they tell variations on them. And then they have their psychologists, Jungian analysts who say, dream it forward, amplify it, keep dreaming it. And they keep thinking about it. And then maybe they write it in their journal. And then maybe they write a story about it. And then maybe they get hundreds of millions of dollars and make an alternate reality out of it that people all over the world are going to go and watch. These people do not stop dreaming. Everything they do, all their cultures. We are the dreamers. And this also comes to me, well, as I'm saying it, I'm thinking Willy Wonka. We are the dreamers. We are the, somebody else knows this quote properly. It's also my favorite band, Echolin, that has a snippet of that on their first album. Comes from Wilfred Bion. It comes from T.S. Eliot. Wallace Stevens, my favorite poet, said things about it. But that idea that maybe more than any other quality or activity, we dream. And I thought it would be cool to talk about that.
Nice. We are the dreamers.
We
Yeah,
are
that's
the
cool.
dreamers.
Hello. My pops just walked in there.
Hello, Mr. Hallberg.
Yeah, he's up there. They've been for dinner. What's up? Okay. Yeah, yeah. Going downtown. All right. Yeah, he's just passing through here. It's quite a dazzling account, man. It's a nice story. I really like the tagline also, like "We are the dreamers." It's like a belly hit somehow. It's just like you want to land in that.
Somewhere in Galaxy M87, there are people talking about. Did you read this article on the dreamers on that planet?
Yeah, that's them.
That's us.
Yeah. No,
They're
I
talking
have.
about us.
Yeah. And also the musical dream is nice. I actually dreamt the other night, like 2 nights ago, I dreamt that I was performing a musical concert, which is weird because I don't play an instrument. I've never had that dream in my entire life. I think I was playing the piano or something. Like I was alone in this circular stage, and there's like people around me, and I was like composing something on a kind of piano-like instrument. It's a very interesting dream, except I don't play. Like I've never had that. But yeah, I mean, I have a lot of associations to this: the image, the screen, the pictogram, the visual representation. Um, I think there's a few different ways that I'd go with this. Like one of them would be, like you said, in terms of beyond and dream work. You know, not the act of physically sleeping at night, even though that's the most apparent one, but in terms of dream work as metabolizing everyday residuals, congesting, digesting fragments into something representable. And that's a kind of healing work that can be done while sleeping, but also meditation or contemplation or reflective states, reverie, as he talks about, the mother holding her little infant and allowing the infant to scream and shout and just holding it for him and letting things be the way they are. So that's kind of one avenue I see.
Yeah,
A different one
mythology.
would be this more Yeah, yeah, exactly. I was thinking also of this controlled hallucinations that you were touching on, how we as a human species always create maps of what's going to happen to us. You know, we are like encoding machines that test our predictions to reality. We might think that we experience the objective reality exactly as it is, but there's always that slight little distortion fueled by subjective kind of encounter with the world. And based on our experience, one can look at the brain as that kind of more of an economical model of the brain, I guess, like more Freudian, where you look at homeostasis, like the body's quest for maintaining a good balance of needs satisfaction. And the way to do that is through predictions. If I do this, I'll get food. If I do this, I'll get intimacy. If I do this, I'll get care, you know, whatever the needs are. But then that dissonance between your prediction and the world's response is constantly updated. And I think the image and the screen plays an important role in that. How you assess a milieu when you come into a room, you know, that's instantaneous, like boom.
Mm-hmm.
The sensory perception of your body relates quickly to the visual top down kind of encoding, and boom, you have that kind of idea, this is what I'm supposed to do. And then you do that and shit doesn't work, and you're like, oh, I'm in trouble now. So you need to update that prediction. And I think there's a bunch of people who talk about this in terms of inference and predictions, predictive coding, homeostasis. That's kind of the neuroscience, the cognitive neuroscience crew. So that's one path. And then the third one, like you alluded to, would be symbols, myth, the archaic element of the pictogram, you know, the archaic element of images predestining us. How do you say predestinate before us? You know, like a prehistoric kind of image. And there's a very interesting French psychoanalyst called Olanier. I don't know if you guys have heard of her, but she was quite famous in France, but I don't think she ever became famous outside of France.
Huh.
Pierre Olanier or something.
I know
She's
some of
quite
the
cool.
French. There was, Didier Anzieu.
Yeah, exactly.
But
La
I don't
Planche
know her.
Anzieu. No, she's not that known, but she was formidable. And she had a very interesting account of what she called emotional pictograms. And her theory of this is that normally we do this separation between primary process and secondary process. We've talked about this in a previous episode. But Olanier says that there's something even before the primary process, which is like a prehistoric primordial element where the infant is not yet aware of his or her own subjectivity. So he's merged with the mother, and he gets a representation of himself and the image at the same time, sucking the titty or the thumb or whatever. So the body and the erogenous zones get coupled with an emotional memory before individuation, before separation. And that is even deeper than the primary process, because primary process is usually associated to fantasy, wishful thinking, delusion. But this thing here would be even under that. So it's a kind of primordial condition of something terrible, I guess, because everything is one and the same. There is no awareness of being a separate subject. And maybe
Which
that,
comes from frustration, doesn't it?
I guess
That when
so.
there's a
Yeah,
difference, as you said, between
yeah,
what
yeah,
emerged and what I got,
yeah,
some function has to kick into gear
yeah.
that
And I
bridges
think I
that gap.
think uh, I think Hillman and Jung and maybe some of that mythological track would be somehow maybe related to that archaic primordial pattern of pictograms as somehow relaying something to us that we know that we don't know it, still it feels like we know it,
Yeah,
something of an echo or something like that.
yeah. Something came to mind though, and about your definition of fantasy, which I
Mm,
think is a good account of a more Freudian perspective. Um, I also think of what Jung and, in a different sense, Melanie Klein did with fantasy. That if you think of fantasy, which they spell Phantasy, that one key difference between the other psychoanalytic traditions and Freud's is the idea that the frustration, the bodily wish, is not necessarily the engine of fantasy, but that fantasy is rather the constant and automatic depiction of the state of the being at that moment. That the
Yeah.
mind is going to have a sort of background feed, in a way, of
Yeah.
images, and that those images start to take a certain kind of form when you're pissed off, when you're hungry, when the
Uh-huh.
world is not
Yeah, yeah,
satisfying.
yeah.
And so you have a couple of approaches here. One is, do we create art as a more sophisticated way of doing what an infant does? Namely, I'm hungry, I got no titty, so I'm going to think of one.
Yeah.
Um,
Paint one.
yeah, I'm going to paint one, or I'm going to make a
Giant titty.
movie, and maybe it's a porno, and maybe it's Bergman.
Yeah.
But either way, does the creativity come out of a state of frustration, or rather, does it come out of that awesome ability we have to conjure alternate worlds in which we
Yeah.
have what we want, or at least get to tell the story about being frustrated?
Yeah, I guess in the second one we're more the creators. I mean, I I link that more to that kind of Bionian approach in a way. I guess Bion in that sense represents in this discussion to me more of the subjective, like the individual as a subject, whereas the Freudian economical model will look more at drives. Like, what do you need? You have a certain amount of monies and you need to buy certain things. It's like transactional view of the organism, whereas the Bionian is closer to aesthetics and subjective creativity. Like you said, you kind of mold your own place in the world through this kind of dream work, like being embedded, link between the unconscious and the conscious. That's like a constant creative process through life. So I guess they're quite different in that sense, maybe. I'm not sure.
Well, they tell different parts of the story, and I think one
Oh,
of the things you bring up the aesthetic, which is not only about beauty, of course. It's not even in the root of the word. It doesn't have anything to do with beauty, but the quality of the experience. Um, One thing that the Freudian tradition doesn't really have anything coherent to speak about is, well, what about beauty?
mm,
What about that richness of feeling that is
I agree.
not about um,
Drive satisfaction.
drive satisfaction? And well, Freud did suggest sublimation, in which through art and science, the nasty urges are cleansed. But as with a few more ambitious attempts of Freud's to get beyond his own metapsychology, um, sublimation, which was you take something raw and you cook it, you make it better, you make it digestible, but you make it higher, redemptive. You make art or science out of, an urge to be smarter than your dad, which in itself was an alternate to killing him in the Oedipus complex because
Yeah.
you're not supposed to. Um, but there's sublimation, and then there is Eros,
Mm,
which is another one of those examples where Freud decided to use an ancient mythological character to describe something he didn't
yeah.
otherwise choose to describe scientifically. And whenever Freud did that, he tended to just sort of peter out because he couldn't deal with, among other things, he couldn't deal with the concept of beauty. He couldn't reduce it. Sublimation and Eros are all about getting somewhere else, about something higher, about
Yeah.
something divorced from the drives and the frustrations.
Yeah.
And so, in a way, that's one of the things that set the stage for everybody who came after Freud. Because, well, I'm sure that Hippocrates was a decent physician for his time, but he needed a few thousand years worth of more doctors to figure out the stuff he couldn't do himself. So, um, cool. Look at that. We've got we've already got the two forks of the tradition there: the Freudian and the Kleinian, Bionian, Jungian. And there's more to be said out of that. But drive, satisfaction, frustration, and beauty.
And maybe there's a triple fork. What do you call it? Like a three, like the Poseidon
A
fork,
trident.
trident. Yeah, it's a trident because I'm quite interested, even though I don't know so much about it. I'm quite interested in that cognitive neuroscience computational model of the mind, where the image and the picture and the dream is just seen as a kind of instrument in the coding, the Bayesian brain. Have you heard this term? There is a term of the Bayesian brain that basically,
Bayesin.
yeah,
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 remind me.
BAY. I think it just looks at the brain as a computer, more or less. Like a constant, sending out stuff, receiving stuff, matching the mismatch, and you have the bottom up process, which is like sensory to cortex, and then you have the top down, which would include the kind of abstract thinking, the concepts, the image that goes down. And this whole machine just flows day in and day out. So in that perspective, the kind of hallucination is nothing but how we all live, basically. In that sense, shooting out your view of things and receiving the feedback from the world, updating your image, that's what we do. And it takes a lot of mental capacity. So it's an expensive way to live. That's why we need to nap, we need to sleep well, we need to work out, we need to eat properly, because the brain in that context is there to keep us alive. In this model, the brain's job is to keep us alive and to make demands on the body, what the body needs to do. So the brain controls the body through controlled hallucinations that are like 99.5% accurate, but that always needs kind of revision. So that would
And
be, I guess, the third kind of thing on the fork. You would have the Freudian drive model in the middle. You would have the Bayesian subjective kind of dream work as a subjective conglomerate of emotional experience on one side, and then you have the computer model of the neuroscientists on the right hand side. We can kill anybody with that trident.
oh, yeah, and there's room for more pointy parts.
Yeah.
But just one more piece here between the Freudian and the other than Freudian. Of course, the Freud's main definition of the purpose of a dream is to keep us asleep. We dream so that we will not be disturbed, awakened by those emergences of the drives and frustrations, which, well, they would wake us up and we'd be crabby the next day and for the rest of our lives. Um, but Bion had this beautiful way of preserving and extending Freud by turning him inside out.
Mm.
And one of the best examples of that was the way in which Bion defined dreaming as the process by which it becomes possible for us to wake up at all. That there is no consciousness, there is no reflection, there is no subject at all without the dreaming that enables us to have a thought and to witness ourselves thinking and to think about the process of thinking and to desire coherence and beauty and satisfy unmet needs through the thought alone, through the image alone. So one idea of being a dreamer is here must be that in some way there is a profound relationship between the fact that we're obsessed with dreams and the fact that we are awake and sentient and able to have uh, dialogues like this one.
Mm. Yeah.
Alpha function, take all of those bodily noises, turbulences, as Bion says, and turn them into something that can be thought about and then something that can
Yeah.
conduct
Didn't he
future
say
thoughts.
something like giving thoughts a thinker, right?
The thoughts without a thinker.
Yeah, and what you said, like through the dreaming, the thoughts will get a thinker. You create the thinker by being able to dream. You know, the person who can dream suddenly has a perspective to his dreams. There is somebody who have thought the thoughts that were digested in the dream. Whereas a person who's awake all the time, he doesn't have that thinker. He is psychotic, basically.
And in that model, Martin, say something more about psychosis, because we already used the word hallucination.
Yeah,
And anybody who is not familiar and comfortable with the language of Bion and Michael Eigen, who is the emissary for many of us for
yeah.
the works, the thinking of Bion. Um, how do you understand the meaning of hallucination and why that word was chosen, given all the baggage it has?
In what context? You mean in because in the
In B,
neuroscientific model, they use hallucination in a perfectly normal setting. They use it just to infer that we are seeing something that is not actually true.
what I'm
And
talking about, yeah, for psychodynamics, though, how we have a
yeah,
word that is
yeah,
associated with malfunction.
yeah. No, in that context, I guess I would, I'm not an expert in that field at all, but the way I understand it is more towards that kind of Bionian Eigen approach where that kind of contact barrier breaks down. I guess one way of explaining a psychotic person would be to say that he or she cannot dream. There is no container in which the thoughts can become metabolized. So everything is evacuated and projected onto the external reality. So the psychotic patient would need help to bring back what he or she continuously evacuates, projects, through projective identification. The person persecuting you becomes an object in the real world. So the hallucination in this sense is a pathological and severe condition, right? You see things that are not there because it's your internal state that has been thrown out like a pizza on the real world. So what you're visually seeing is your internal creatures. So if that person was able to dream reverie, if there was a container, an internal container that would able to digest these thoughts, bind them together, the outer objects would become internal again. And then that person would see there's trees out there, there's an ocean, there's beautiful nature, there is no persecutory gang members trying to shoot me. So that would be my rudimentary understanding of psychosis in this context.
And by making it possible for, well, use a patient or an Alisand here, by making it possible for a psychotic patient to know the difference between what is inner and what is outer,
Yeah,
um, you make it possible for him to work on that inner experience because it's
exactly.
now not a quality of the world.
Yeah,
It is not a world full of frightening things, of
yeah,
things that come and go unbidden. Uh, there is a basic understanding of what comes from me and what is out there.
yeah,
And that's a precondition for analysis. But then, if we are the dreamers and there is a non pathological, by the way, I want to say that the idea of the hallucination also does go all the way back to Freud and pre Freud, but we won't go there at the moment. That the absent breast
mm,
is
yeah,
hallucinated. More to be said about that. But if we are going to talk about the humans of this epoch, these few tens of thousands of years, as the age of the dreamers, and this has nothing fundamentally to do with psychosis or sickness of any kind, then what is this non-pathological use of the word hallucination? This constant evoking and invoking and provoking of an imagining of worlds, versions of worlds, which are which are alternates to the one we objectively find ourselves in.
yeah. That's that's a big that's a big question.
And why
The,
beauty?
yeah, I'm gonna have to digest this. I got stuck a little bit on those contact points. I think it's an important, element. There is one kind of contact barrier that Bion talks about, the internal contact barrier, and then there is that outer bodily membrane between you and the world. So I think there's levels of those contact points that are always breathing to some extent. They're oscillatory, that they're not, they can let things out, but they can also let things in, right? Both internally, psychically, and vis-a-vis an object or the world. So there is that kind of breathing pattern that permeates us, I think, is a word that fits for me in this context. Those membranes allow us to change and be changed by our surroundings. So I got stuck a little bit there. I don't really know how the word hallucinations would fit into this kind of context that you're describing now of thinking the new world. Maybe as a creative impulse, as a aesthetic drive, like you were saying before, of reaching beyond or ascending above the Freudian drive satisfaction. I definitely agree to that there is something inherent in us that strives for, let's say, harmony or melody or union, or I don't know, like Eros, something to that effect that goes beyond object relations. And I guess art, poetry for me is one vehicle for that, for sure. And music is one for many people, I guess.
And there's a whole nother idea: musical, acoustic images, acoustic hallucination.
Yeah.
But I want to throw something in here because clearly, I mean, the word hallucination has been stretched maybe to its breaking point. And, well, look up the etymology. There is, first, in the online etymology dictionary, the Latin hallucinatus, which then turned into hallucinatus, which is the past participle of hallucinare, is to have illusions, which derives from to wander in the mind, to mentally wander, to dream, but also to talk unreasonably, to ramble in thought. Gosh, it's one big mass hallucination. To wander in mind, there's the Greek alien, as in hallucination, alien, to wander in mind, to be at a loss, to be beside oneself. Now, I love words and the way they come together, their meeting points. You also have the Greek ecstasy, which means to stand outside oneself, to be beside oneself. However, the Greek halion means also to be beside oneself with grief, joy, or perplexity. So you have two closely related words with very different implications, because you have ecstasy, which we associate with profound pleasure, something exemplified by an orgasm, but they're spiritual ecstasies. There are other kinds of sensual, even intellectual ecstasies, ideas that blow you away, that fragment you, and make you land someplace other than where you're standing.
Yeah, but like you said, food, wine, music, those are also concrete, small tangents of this. You eat some delicious food, you can start tearing up almost.
Yep.
And it's that kind of dialogue between things outside of oneself almost. Like, why am I crying? I don't understand. It's just veal, or I ate today
why am I
trout.
crying? It's just veal.
I ate today trout that is quite cute. There's people here in the summer house neighborhood that have fished by themselves with a net, and there's like a 5-year-old girl and her dad who sold like for $6 like smoked sea trout that they have caught in the net. So we bought one of those and had it with some potatoes and rosé wine, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's so good. And it's really that kind of thing where something just hits me that's kind of beyond any cognitive representation. It's like, fuck, it's so good. It's just
I really would like you guys and our millions of listeners and viewers to come away with something from this show. So
Sea trout.
I just want to add, you're in a good restaurant, the chef comes out himself or herself to ask you how's the trout. Don't describe it as cute.
Yeah. No, it was
You'll get hurt.
yeah, it was more the girl and her father that was a cute little thing in the neighborhood here. It's not that very often that people do that anymore. You know, you fish the fish and then you put on a little plastic table and you sell it to the bystanders.
Oh yeah.
Uh, I thought that was cute. But those sensations anyway, like the food, music, wine. I guess sex is a little bit different, at least in my book. It hits a broader register of sensations, maybe. But those kind of what would one call them? Like food and wine. What are they? Are they like taste orgasms, or what are they?
Well, yeah. Those are gustatory, olfactory hallucinations, you could say, ecstasies. But one of the things you're saying here is that any of the, call them primal, primitive functions, the things that we need to live, um, our food, um, our procreation, our pleasure in the bodies of ourselves and others, we can elevate them to an art. And in a way, you can say the sublimated aspects of our culture are essentially taking the basics, the bottle, or in many cases, the bodily basics, cuisine, um, good sex, Kama Sutra, whatever you figure out on your own. Um, you take something that would work just as well if it gave you the nutrients you wanted, uh, delivered the gametes to to your mate. You didn't have to spend all that time bringing ecstasy, but you can.
Mm.
It's a good idea.
Is
So
there a
what?
connection here with the erotic?
Well,
The
yeah,
erotic as a kind of profound, like the erotic dimension of life, like the erotic as part of culture or political programs or organization of things, where the erotic is allowed space as constitutive power. Um,
absolutely. There, it depends to some extent on what angle on Eros you want. I mean, the one I gravitate towards
mm,
is the erotic, is the instinct or that dimension of psychic life and spiritual life that always aims beyond itself, that aims to make more connections.
mm.
This is
Yeah,
partly
exactly. Yeah,
from
yeah,
Freud
yeah.
himself, but
Mm.
um, you know,
No, for sure. That's kind of the main view of Eros that I was going with as well when we're talking about like patterns and union and kind of beauty and those things. But now I just started to think of a different. That's why I say erotic rather than Eros. Like erotic as something more linked to, Dionysian. I don't know, sexual, sensual, um, getting lost in eroticism. Um, Bataille has written about this, I think, at some point. I don't know too much about it, but I don't think they're meaning that the unifying eros in that sense. I think I'm after something more. I can't find the right word. I would probably have to look this up. I don't really know what I'm talking about. It was just a shoot. Um,
no, I think it's
because
a good one.
culture, a culture that allows for the erotic. We're talking about something else than eros in its standard view.
Well,
Like,
think you mentioned Dionysus, okay?
yeah,
And so, did you ever read about the Bacchae, the
yeah,
myth of the Bacchae? Do you
yeah.
remember? Well, there are a few sort of helpful points to take from that, but what do you remember about the Bacchae?
But that's the drinking party, right? Bacchus, when they celebrate the.
The Bacchanal, right?
Yeah, isn't the guy with the horns or the.
Oh, he's got
There's.
many. He does a whole cosplay. You know,
Cosplay.
there's
Meat cute.
The Greek gods knew how to play. They could party. But one important takeaway from the Bacchae was that if you don't give Dionysus his due,
Yeah.
if you don't worship him, and by worship I mean party, hardy,
Yeah.
sex, drugs, and what would eventually become rock and roll. His minions, the Bacchae, they're gonna tear you
It's
up and eat
minions. Yeah.
you. Yep.
They're gonna fuck you up.
They're gonna fuck you up because one of the things that arguably was known implicitly to the people, and was this Sophocles, Euripides, his tailor Eumenides, but knew was that if I was channeling my father, miss you, Dad, that if you don't take care of that part of your nature, well,
yeah,
good luck.
Yeah. This is more a little bit of what I was touching, I guess, something to that effect. But to be honest, I don't know. It was just a tangent that I went off. I just wanted to probe it.
That's what we're here for.
But maybe ask Joe what we've been doing now for
Joe. You're here.
Last 40 minutes.
That's a good question. I to be perfectly honest, I'm having a hard time following.
Yeah, that's probably a good assessment of.
No shame in that.
I think that is at the very least as much on me as if it is on you guys at all.
Well, look, no. This is a pretty niche subject. This is a whole literature. But I have a feeling that in here, as a musician and a comic and a political commentator and all of that, you got plenty to say about the experience of impulse and entertainment and satisfaction and self-deprivation and pleasure, what we kind of owe to the gods of wine, sex.
I gotta plug in my computer.
Yeah, maybe
you're just killing time, aren't you?
So the impulse to entertain, yeah, I mean, well, that's one thing that I could sort of latch onto here is like the comedy world is very much about like self-sacrifice and self-deprecation is the term, is like the if there are technical terms like what comedians do, that's like the on stage version is self-deprecation, like you're making jokes about yourself. But I would
But
say,
if all it was self-deprecation, there'd be no show.
Right. Well, yeah, because what I'm saying is that like I was about to say self-flagellation and and then was reminded of self-deprecation. But yeah, that's what it, because like we've talked a little about this before, how there is, to an extent, there's a lot you can gain from struggle. But I do think there's a fine line between that and glorifying struggle. And that's something that I see with, I mean, I think it's all parts of our society because of capitalism, but comedians, artists in general, but like comedians and musicians are where I see it, where like people kind of torture themselves to to be in this world, especially in comedy, where I think the paid work is much, it's very few and far between, and so you just have a whole just massive amounts of people just dedicating their entire lives to this thing that exhausts them and is not very good to them.
Why? What's the payoff?
Well, I think the perceived payoff, or like the sort of implicitly promised payoff is success. That like, oh, you will, if you keep at it and you're funny, then like you will become a headliner and you will tour the country and the world, and you will be, you know, in movies and on TV and all this stuff, and you'll get all sorts of money.
Hey Joe, can I tell you that you said that I think actually better than Freud did. Let me give you a quote here. Thanks to me. I'm reading my own book here. Um, I do this thing about how Freud was conflicted about artists, poets, musicians, which he explicitly says because scientists like me, we have to just sort of stare at the lock on the gate of the woman's heart and try to figure out a way to get in. But the poet, he just knows with a little twist of words how to get in. And Freud meant exactly what he's implying there. What he wrote is honor, power, wealth, fame, and the love of women are the objects of the artist's desire, but he lacks the means for achieving these satisfactions. Consequently, like any other man, he turns away from the reality to the wishful constructions of his life of fantasy, whence the path might lead to neurosis, killjoy. But one of the things he's also saying here is that the artist, particularly for him, the poet, but you're talking about the singer-songwriter, the guy at the party with the guitar who always goes home with somebody, whether he's good or not, somehow that
It works.
alone unlocks the lock. That's the comedian too. That's the artist who is able to turn those fantasies to his own advantage, partly by making pain enjoyable to the audience.
Right.
Yeah, you nailed it with that one. I think so too. I think it's a way of living in the world. I mean, I don't know. I've never done stand-up comedy. I haven't watched much, but I see it as a very, very challenging thing to do. So for the people to do that, I guess there would need to be more driving forces than the vague promise of one day maybe becoming famous. I assume, that there is a path of a way to be oneself. Maybe, this is a way I can live. This is a way I can utilize my experiences, my views, my quirks, things I'm good at. There's no job that hire me. I'll create my own job. Something to that, which is admirable, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that's the impulse. But I think people lose sight of um how often it doesn't it just doesn't work out that way, and how many people are, working another job or jobs,
Yeah,
um
yeah,
will
exactly.
will like torture themselves for years trying to do the other thing too.
Yeah,
That was me. I've always had like multiple jobs and tried to do that, and now I'm finding that I'm perfectly happy and probably more happy not doing it.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, I don't know. I think like I do think that yeah, like there's truth to that Freud quote broadly when it comes to artists, but I also think that um the the society we live in crushes that possibility for so many people.
yeah,
Whereas, you know, there are plenty of places, now and in the past where uh people just did these things, and yeah, if you have more money, or you have more access um to it, but uh it it's just um yeah, I think there's not uh yeah, that opportunity doesn't exist for most people, I would say. And it's interesting what, like, I came across some uh you know I mean, I guess, like, Soviet propaganda type stuff on YouTube from, the Cold War era. I mean, that's when the Soviet Union existed, but it was about there were a couple of videos about art, and artists, and how the US treats art, and how it treats its people in general. And it's arguable how well people were treated in the Soviet Union. I'm sure it's a mixed bag like anything else, but um, I think that it's interesting seeing like the criticisms made by other societies. Um, it,
Well, you're one of the things I think that since you've had this really interesting line of thought about this sort of idealized socialism, thanks to Star Trek, um, but the capitalist critique is an important one, and now it's not just a capitalist critique, but one that's seen through the eye of social media, in which it's no longer about you got to go drive 14 miles to go to the club where the comedian is. You got everybody in the world who thinks they're funny, saturating the market, so to speak, and the whole everywhere is the marketplace, so that it's very difficult to get your voice heard, assuming you even have one, and perhaps especially if you have one, because part of that contemporary capitalist art market is that the cheaper, the quicker, the nastier, the more sensationalist you can make something, well, the more attention you're going to get. Look at it. Look at who makes the most money and gets the most influence. You're talking about YouTube influencers who, electrocute rats and go film, suicide bodies. The Paul brothers do this and manage to get in the ring with Floyd Mayweather. Well, we've got good professional fighters around the corner here who can make $500 twice a year for doing a little club show, because unfortunately they're good at what they do and there's no market for that.
right.
I want to make another connection to comedy here, which also goes to other performance. Freud's own quote here was that the scientist knows that artists, here's the quote, possess in their art a master key to open with ease all female hearts. Yeah, right. Whereas we stand helpless, we scientists and regular folks stand helpless at the strange design of the lock, and have first to torment ourselves to discover a suitable key to it. Yet, I found another spot in which Freud also calls himself not merely a thinker, but a conquistador. That his thing was to conquer the mysteries of the mind.
Unmapped territories.
Exactly. Now think of this. The conquistador conquers and kills. What does a comedian do? He kills or he dies.
Yeah.
So in a way, here is a survival paradigm. A survival and conquer and kill paradigm. Something primal, that's the jungle. Even when you're talking about, the Comedy Cellar.
Yeah. That's something I can really relate to. Is there's again, as much as like I relate all of this stuff to socialism and capitalism, like I think stand-up comedy is an incredibly capitalist art form. It's one person, like being the master of everything in their little domain, and it is it's all about like the individual, and uh there is there's this like conqueror's mindset. That's how we talk about that stuff in comedy. And there's the feeling you get when you like kill a crowd. Like it is like this wild, it feels like a very ancient thing. Like you can sort of tell, like, oh, I see how, like, mass murderers like Genghis Khan or whatever existed. Like that's there is
because they weren't funny,
right.
They had to actually kill.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's like as much as like sports are kind of, or even politics itself are kind of stand-ins for war. Uh,
Uh,
there is that element in maybe in all art forms to some degree, but in all endeavors to some degree, but certainly stand-up comedy, and that's one thing I find about it that's very entrenched in the capitalist mindset.
mm, yeah. Well, that Freudian quote of like the separation between the artist and the scientist. I mean, it's yeah, it's a little bit. I was about to say unfortunate, but maybe that's not the right word. But it brings back to that very well-known kind of dichotomy, I guess, between the idea world, like Plato and Pythagoras, and the harmony of ideas and idealistic utopian. One could go on with like associations from that bulk, versus then the kind of objective, cold physical reality of the scientist that deals with the interactions of matter and pure kind of elementary particles bouncing on and off each other in different constellations. And I think maybe there's that complementarity principle that's useful sometimes, of not fighting too hard, of trying to bridge the two where they can't maybe be bridged, but recognizing that they're both valid, just not simultaneously. You could, like that thing, you can listen to the harmony or the melody of a tune, but you can't maybe hear both at the same time. Or maybe some people can, I don't know. But you understand where I'm getting with that there is that kind of complementarity idea, that these things are there, but depending on where we stand, we can be immersed in a more aesthetic dimension of viewing things, or
Yeah,
we can go and stand in a more kind of Freudian scientist paradigm, and they all kind of add up from within, but it's hard to encompass it all in one kind of clear view.
yeah,
uh,
that's an interesting point because I think I mean, so well, I meant to say before the way Freud put that is obviously very dated in terms of the what was it, conquering the woman's heart or whatever. Like it's a little insane, not the least of which because obviously women can be artists and anything else too. But uh yeah, I mean, but that's an interesting point you just made there because there I think for a long time was a lack of um uh science in pop culture, and it could be that they those things obviously like more often stand on their own like you're saying. um but then I think there's something interesting that happens when you have all these very popular like science communicator guys like Carl Sagan was maybe like
mm,
the first really big ones of like the modern era, and then like Neil deGrasse Tyson has sort of a mixed reputation right now, but him too, and Bill Nye and Michio Kaku, and like um, that's a really interesting phenomenon because I don't know if that was ever really um, a a job like that was that was not really like a role in public life
You
before.
mean the cosmologist entertainer?
Yeah, it was really interesting.
what key does he have to the lock? I reckon it's quite good.
Well, just imagine, walking up to a chick in a bar and say, "Hey, honey,
I'm
let
a
me describe a
cosmologist.
black hole for you.
um,
She'll
but
run
You
away.
and me, baby, be like the meeting of two neutron stars. Oh, the gravity waves will be picked up all over the universe."
that's terrible.
Doesn't work. Tried it.
um, but yeah, that's really interesting because I think my generation grew up watching Bill Nye, and so it's sort of normal to us. And he's like, he was a comedian. He was on some like public access sketch comedy show before he did Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Uh,
Um, but he's an educated scientist, and but he's a funny guy who knows how to present stuff. And uh, the, but the one that I think Carl Sagan really stands out because there is such a like poetry to his um his
Yeah.
the way he describes these things and why they're important. And Neil deGrasse Tyson was a direct mentee of his, and does a similar thing. But yeah, if you watch Cosmos, like either the Carl Sagan or the new one with
Mhm.
Neil deGrasse Tyson, like that's that's what it is. It's like poeticizing science
Yeah.
in a way
I
that
mean, it is deeply
Billions
poetic.
and billions of stars have been caught up in the Harvey Weinstein scandal. I'm sorry, go on.
No, but I think, yeah, I just finished a book by Frank Wilczek, who's a physicist and writes some of this stuff. So I was,
Fundamentals.
yeah, so I was inspired by that. And on the ending passages, I don't have the quotes here now because the book is in the other house down there, but it was kind of this, physicalism to where we're all kind of, everything is made of the same stuff. There's like 4 or 5 elementary particles and they all obey to 3 different, like spin and charge and mass or something like this. So everything comes from the same kind of stuff, but the kind of artistic consequences of this, or the more poetic elaborations of these insights, can be deeply moving, you know in terms of how we are participating in the world we create, and how these membranes and contact points within us and between us are also made up of the same matter as everything else. So that it can lead to that sense of awe. Einstein, I guess, was a good proponent of that, of a hardcore scientist that was really imbued by this artistic, or this kind of poetic sentiment, right, in everything he wrote. So there is that way of being in touch with both of those drives in a better way than Freud was able to do,
Using
I think.
beauty and
Yeah,
elegance to bring these ideas
yeah,
to people.
yeah.
yeah, without refuting the fundamental scientific laws of that governs it all. Um,
Yeah.
But
so
can I get to 'cause I think this is a beautiful bridge to something I think Joe, you're in a position to say something about. So I think the capitalist critique here has a lot of relevance. If everything in the physical universe amounts to, well, Wilczek, was it Maxwell and Einstein, in their own way, kind of proved Democritus from 2,000 some odd years ago correct, that the building blocks of the universe are all these basic indivisible units. That's how God, or the processes of creation, made things to be. And that if sublimation and Eros and the urge to be more than just these vehicles for physical forces, in our case biological ones, hunger, sex, violence, if we want to be more than that, well, on the one hand, Joe, and you said before that stand-up comedy is very very much of a capitalist creation, or a capitalist thing. What I was thinking then is that ideally stand-up comedy entertainers in general, but the storytellers, the ones who get a story across by making people laugh and relate to it, um, that these people are part of a tradition that goes back to the beginning of culture. The telling of stories around the fire, that both unites a community, but also tells people, hey, here's what happened in the hunt today, and while I'm at it, let me sing a little song. Now, if you take this tradition of storytelling as a way of unifying a community, of helping people connect to one another and relate to one another and share their understanding, and you subject it to a capitalist machine in which every comedian is just another unit competing for its moment on stage, ready to be destroyed and discarded, in which the value of an entertainer is determined by what his or her performance does for the bottom line of the production group or whatever, then you have the capitalist forces that decimate, that atomize all the things that are unique about people, destroying that connection to the tradition of storytellers, that comedians and entertainers are nothing but deliverers of pleasure in the moment, with nothing that goes beyond that. But that is a symptom of the cultural context, not the tradition.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's yeah, that's interesting. If you think of stand up as like completely its own thing, then yeah, it's a capitalist creation. But if you tie it into um this storytelling tradition, which yeah, you know, it's like anything else in culture, it's inseparable from what came before it and alongside it. Um yeah, uh I think that's a good point. And yeah, I was thinking this before, um, but I think yeah, like ideally, uh, no art would really be a job because it wouldn't have to be. Like it would just be something people did, uh, you know, for recreation or as a hobby, and if other people enjoyed what you create,
Yeah.
great. But it's like you don't need it to pay the rent, so you don't have to, you know, guide like guide it along those lines. Like this is what Comedy Central will pay me for, so this is what I'm going to say or whatever.
Ah, but like a measure of good society could be that the artists are the fine grain of it all, right? I don't know which philosopher had it that way, but I'm sure there are the ones that spoke of the poet and the writers and the painters and the musicians as the vanguards of the highest kind of cultural sophistication. So, you know, could definitely argue that the way we have it is completely mixed up. It should be the other way around, that, you know, artists should be paid to lead the way towards those images that guide us to beauty, in a way, and not exploited for mass tweets or mass producible memes or whatever it's called.
Real
um,
fragments you can sell.
yeah, exactly. But in terms of like trying to wrap up a little bit, I guess my attempt at hypothesis here would be something along the lines that these different versions of the image and the hallucination and the vision and the pictogram, are very important kind of doorways in different respects to go towards that Einsteinian Sagan point where the science, the fundamentals can become beauty. So there is an addition, there is a build on, there is an add on to our fundamental constitution in which we become larger, wider, we are expanding, and become richer in a way. And that the image or the vision can be one important doorway to step into that kind of mode of being. If done properly, let's say, if utilized correctly, the vision can be an instrumental tool to help us go further in that direction. um, I don't know,
It's absolutely beautiful. Go
Yeah,
on, Jim.
that was a really good way to tie together, you know, the first, you know, big chunk of this episode that I was having a hard time wrapping my head around. Um, because yeah, I think it's true. It's like um the same way like an ayahuasca trip shouldn't be a tourist destination the way it is now.
yeah,
It's
Mm-hmm.
like
yeah.
that for like experiencing these things.
Excuse me, I
Oh,
didn't get to meet the goddess. Hmm? Do I get my
Go in
money
the
back?
Yeah, you can go in line B and take a
yeah, yeah.
cucumber from the blue machine.
The goddess speaks to those she wants to speak to. I am afraid that wasn't you.
That's fine.
You don't have the key to the lock, you damn
Yeah.
artist. Yeah.
Um,
But
Go
yeah, it's
ahead.
an interesting point that art serves that same purpose and should be treated as such.
Yes, and one little last piece of thread to tie it. Um, Science, all the priorities of a culture, everything that is going to enable it to thrive, to master its world, to build towards the future. Um, Einstein, Sagan, Ptolemy, I don't care who you're talking about here, they had to dream their myths. The Big Bang is a myth. Okay, the grand unified theory, which we don't have entirely yet, quantum loop gravity, and the periodic table, these are all myths. They're all stories. I'm not saying they're false. I'm saying that if there is a fundamental truth out there, a structure to the universe, the way to convey it is by telling a story about it. And the people who tell those stories well, they have to be able to do the math. Otherwise, they're just, they're journalists, which is fine in and of itself. But um, our most important ideas, the ones that will endure, become myths. And myths are the stories that organize reality and culture and the human experience across time, which is why we can tell the story of Democritus and Aristotle and Aquinas and Maxwell. It's on up through Tyson. And I think that does tie together a lot of what we're doing here. We have to dream our reality, even the hard physics of it.
Isn't it so that Einstein is known for having his kind of thought experiments that one can speak of almost as dreams, or, hallucinations maybe in some form? Like, he came up with this, previously completely unthought of views of how things should be. And then he tested them and he found out that it was indeed so. So, I mean, that's a dreaming of a reality in one sense.
Absolutely.
Par excellence,
Par excellence.
Yeah.
Michael Faraday um, was a bookbinder. He was a poor man who had no mathematical ability whatsoever, but he dreamt, he imagined the lines of force permeating the universe and how they would interact. And then Maxwell came along and came up with the math that proved Faraday was right in pretty much every respect. But it began with the dreaming. It took a mathematician to translate it for other mathematicians.
We are the dreamers.
We are the dreamers. And I guess
Yeah,
it's not so bad that I can't do math.
I was just reminded of the article you sent, Martin, because I do remember seeing the title and thinking, like, I've read things like this before. Then the title was A Guide to Why Your World is a Hallucination. And I remember coming across this through well, this in itself I'm not sure, but yeah, it's that, like, your brain, like, we can explain all of this just like very basically scientifically, that like your brain does this and that and your eyes work this way. That's like how you see the world. And it's like, well, that's not like some kind of universal truth. That's how we see the world. That is a form of hallucination. And that was sort of related to what I came across something that Stephen Hawking said about meaning. And this was something that I struggled with a lot when I was younger. Like I had depression and just struggled with this whole, like, I had a hard time with school, with like having jobs, with everything. And I was like, why is any of this happening? Why do I have to work so hard just to have a life that I'm that is not that enjoyable to me? And what does anything mean anyway? And the way Stephen Hawking explained this was that meaning is just part of that hallucination that we have. Like, it's no more or less real than anything else. So, like, yeah, your eyes work the way they work. Birds have different eyes, they work differently. Like, it's a different thing for them. But like, yeah, meaning is technically something we made up, but that it's either it's all real or none of it.
And there's that intermediate ground, though, Joe, which is that the meaning can be shared. The story holds up, or else we toss it and get a better one. And we can tell somebody from another part of the world with a totally different frame of reference our story, and they probably have something analogous to it. It's archetypal, meaning that the meaning is built into the capacities of the human mind.
Right.
Yeah.
The
And
only
the
thing that
fundamental
changes is the costumes and the particulars, but the structure, same story.
Pyramids.
Yeah, and I think it's important what you touched there, that the sharing makes the meaning come alive, right? You can have a meaning in your own house late at night, but it's firstly when you come through to other people and they can relate to it, they can share it, they can feedback on it, they laugh at your jokes, they show you that they understand. Your meaning has entered into the universe, entered into an intersubjective relationship with others, and that's when the meaning kind of gains a higher meaning. The meaning becomes meaningful in a way. So I think that's an important point you make there, Dan, that it's some part of what we're talking about, although it hasn't been at the front in this episode, definitely relates to how we are with each other, and the way we make each other come alive by being with and witnessing and sharing in together. Um,
That is a hell of a dream.
yeah.
It
All
works
right.
sometimes too. Thank you
Yeah,
guys.
it's about bedtime here, so it's about time for me and go and dream. See if I play another piano concert tonight.
All right, well, try to record this one.
Yeah. All right.
Guys, Joe, Martin, I'll see you next week.
All right.
Have a good
Bye,
evening.
folks.
Bye bye.